Procrastination fallacy. The procrastination fallacy is a reasoning error where people irrationally delay action, assuming more time or better conditions will arise in the future. This often stems from the belief that postponement has no major consequences or that future circumstances will resolve current challenges. Commitment bias. Commitment bias is the tendency to stick with past decisions, even when they no longer make sense, to appear consistent and rational. This often happens because we want to justify our actions to ourselves and others, avoiding the discomfort of admitting mistakes. For example, someone may continue to invest in a failed project that they have previously invested in instead of cutting their losses. Hyperbolic discounting. Hyperbolic discounting is a cognitive bias where individuals favor smaller, immediate rewards over larger rewards that require waiting. This behavior becomes more pronounced when the delay between the present and the reward is shorter, leading people to undervalue future benefits even when they are significantly greater. Survivorship bias. Survivorship bias is the term first coined in the Second World War, when the Allies were looking for ways to better armor their aircraft. Obviously, you can't just stick armor everywhere because it's very heavy and very inefficient material-wise. So what they did was they just said, okay, let's look at the planes that came back, see which ones had bullet holes in them, and then put armor where most of the bullet holes were. But a mathematician called Abraham Wald realized that the planes that came back with bullet holes meant that if the planes were shot in those places, they were fine. So it sounded counterintuitive. They wanted to armor the planes where there were no bullet holes, because that meant that if there were bullet holes, the plane would go down. And that actually extends to a lot of other aspects that might be interesting in your life. For example, because of the internet, a lot of people seem to think by being a college dropout, you will then go into the business world and make a shit ton of money. But in reality, that is survivorship bias. You might see a lot of dropouts making a lot of money, but that's because the ones you don't see, you never hear about. Decoy Effect. The decoy effect is a cognitive bias where people's preferences between two options are influenced by the introduction of a third, less attractive option. For example, if a small coffee costs $2, a large costs $5, and a medium costs $4.50, people are more likely to choose the large because it seems like a better deal compared to the overpriced medium. Pseudocertainty Effect. The pseudocertainty effect is when people prefer to avoid risk if the possible outcomes are presented positively, but are willing to take risks if the possible outcomes are presented negatively, even if the actual outcomes are the same. For example, when people were told a treatment would save 200 lives for sure, most chose it over a riskier option that had a 1/3 chance of saving 600 lives. However, when it was presented as a 400 death scenario with a 2/3 chance of 600 deaths, most people were willing to take the risk. The way it was presented changed how people viewed it, but it didn't change the actual outcome. Choice supportive bias. Choice supportive bias is the tendency to overestimate the positive aspects of a chosen option while underestimating its negatives. Simultaneously, we remember rejected options more negatively, creating an exaggerated gap between the choices. Prospect theory. Prospect theory is the idea that people make choices based on perceived gains and losses, not overall results. Losing feels worse than winning feels good, so decisions often aim to avoid losses, even if they're not the best overall choice. Reactive devaluation. Reactive devaluation is a cognitive bias where we instinctively dismiss or undervalue proposals from someone we view negatively or as an adversary. This happens because we assume that their offer must put their own interests before ours, even if the proposal is objectively beneficial. Post-purchase rationalization. Post-purchase rationalization is a cognitive bias where individuals justify purchases they regret, convincing themselves they made the right choice. This happens because we dislike admitting we made an irrational decision. If you liked this video, you can also watch videos from this playlist.